Zelda, Metroid, Mario Party, and of course, Paper Mario. What do all these things have in common? They all got completely fucked on the Wii. Okay, not really, but in the case with Paper Mario, there's definitely a group of people out there that'll argue otherwise. After the critical success of the first two entries, expectations were fairly high. The original Paper Mario introduced us to a unique and charming twist on the RPG formula. Then the Thousand Year Door came along and nearly perfected that style of game. Creating a follow-up at this point was never going to be an easy task, but it was something we knew Intelligent Systems was more than capable of. We wouldn't have to wait long either. Only 2 years after the release of The Thousand Year Door at E3 2006, we'd get our first look at the follow-up to this GameCube classic. What the hell is this? Yeah, Paper Mario was now a 2D platformer and was originally announced as a light GameCube title before being reworked into a Wii game. Now, this was actually my introduction to the Paper Mario series. I rented it back when it first came out, and I loved it. I was completely enthralled by how this game depicted the Mario universe. The story, characters, gameplay, it was all unlike any other Mario game I had played at the time. This was my first Paper Mario game, and I thought I finally understood why this series was so highly regarded. Well, that is until I made the mistake of going online to see what other people thought. Now, the reactions I saw weren't all bad, but there were definitely quite a few hardcore Paper Mario fans that were quick to label this one as the black sheep of the series, the low point in an otherwise stellar lineup of games. If only they knew what was to come. So I thought, oh well, I guess I like a controversial game. I'll just keep that little detail to myself and never bring it up with Paper Mario fans in the fear of being ripped to shreds for it. And that's exactly what I did. But then fast forward to modern day, and well, people are a lot more positive towards it now, which made me feel a bit, whiplashed, I guess you could say. I mean, I went from thinking this game was despised by a certain section of the fan base to seeing those same people years later go, actually, you know what, maybe it wasn't that bad. Which, yeah, with hindsight, I can kind of see why they think that. So what's the deal with this game? Were some people too quick to judge just because it wasn't The Thousand Year Door 2? Or is this entry actually not that great when you compare it to the originals? Let's find out. So, in typical Paper Mario fashion, we start with an intro sequence to set the mood. It begins by telling us about a book called The Dark Prognosticus, which contains stories of future events. Apparently, a bunch of people sought after this book, wishing to see their future or whatever. However, no one who obtained the book ever found happiness. I guess a bunch of Paper Mario fans must have found it then. We're then taken to Peach and Bowser's wedding. Finally! But turns out the whole thing was forced by this clown that goes by the name Count Bleck, and Peach just refuses to go along with it. God damn it! But she's eventually forced to marry Bowser by one of Count Bleck's minions. With Peach and Bowser tying the knot, something called the Chaos Heart gets created. Luigi then plays the role of Wedding Crasher, jumps on the Chaos Heart, which causes an explosion, and bam! We're taken to the title screen. Now, this intro sequence is absolutely amazing, and not just because of, well, you know. It does exactly what any good introduction should do and instantly hooks you by just confusing the hell out of you. Like, why did Bowser and Peach have to get married? Who is Count Bleck? What happened to everyone after the explosion? It incentivizes you to immediately jump into the game just so you can make sense of it all. In my opinion, this is without a doubt the most memorable introduction to any Paper Mario game ever. Though I may have a bit of a bias. Starting up the actual game though, we learn that, surprise surprise, Peach has been kidnapped. Again. So Mario and Luigi pay Bowser a visit because duh, who else could have done it, but learn that he actually isn't the culprit this time. Instead, Count Bleck shows up and reveals he's the one who kidnapped the princess. He then kidnaps everyone in Bowser's castle, leaving behind nothing but an unconscious Mario. Mario's then woken up by a butterfly named Tippy. She's apparently a pixel or a fairy and asks for Mario's help in stopping Count Bleck. She then takes Mario to a place called Flipside where we get a bit of an exposition dump on what the heck is going on. Here's the too long to read version. So apparently Blecky Boy here currently has the book that can predict the future. In the book he read about an event that will end all worlds, which he wants to do for reasons I won't spoil. To do this, a person of pure heart must marry some evil stud like Bowser in order to create the Chaos Heart, which causes a void to form in the sky, which will grow until it eventually consumes everything. Now, this is a very simplified version of the plot, and I'm leaving out a ton of details because, well, I don't really like spoiling stuff. But just know that there is a lot to this story. The whole thing starts off fairly tame though. For the first couple of chapters, it's just a story about some guy in a top hat trying to destroy the world. Nothing too outlandish. I mean, that's basically the plot of Monopoly, right?
You've been taken for a ride.
But by the time you hit the halfway point, stuff just gets real, man. Like there's this whole thing about a pair of lost lovers and Tippy, and then just, I don't want to say too much because I don't want to spoil it. But it's just so goddamn good. I praised 1,000 Year Door's plot for being so unprecedented for a Mario game, which I do still stand by, but at the end of the day, the 1,000 Year Door still had a very video gamey plot, I guess you could say. Super Paper Mario's plot, on the other hand, is like something you'd see out of a best-selling novel or film. It's extremely well written, and actually had me getting fairly emotional during certain sections. However, no story is without faults, and Super Paper Mario's is no exception. Like I said, the actual narrative itself is top-notch, but since this is a Mario game, and Mario games apparently aren't allowed to have any less than 8 chapters, they were forced to stretch the story out for a bit longer than it needed to be. After I got to about the 5th or 6th chapter, I was just ready for it to end already. The game gets to a point where it stops introducing new elements like party members, abilities, and plot details, and just kind of coasts along in the latter half as you collect the remaining plot MacGuffins. In previous Paper Mario games, these low points in the story would usually be held up by the self-contained scenarios found in each chapter. But honestly, they aren't nearly as strong here as they were in past games. Don't get me wrong, there are still some extremely memorable moments, like having to pay off an expensive vase that you accidentally broke, or the ending of Chapter 3 where there's literally a dating sim section. However, the problem comes from how everything is structured. You see, instead of each chapter playing out as a continuous narrative like in previous titles, Super Paper Mario cuts each chapter into 4 stages. Basically, it's set up like a traditional Mario platformer, which makes sense for this new gameplay style. For the most part, this new structure works fairly well, but other times it just doesn't. You see, in order for something like this to work, each stage needs to add something meaningful to the experience. If a stage doesn't do this, it ends up feeling like pointless filler, and unfortunately that happens a bit too often here. Like, take Chapter 4 for example. You'll start out by floating around in space with this adorable little alien named Squirps as you shoot down enemies in a similar fashion to an old school shoot 'em up game. Alright, pretty cool concept. But we still have 3 more stages to go through. Is this shoot 'em up style of gameplay enough to fill an entire chapter? No, and thankfully the developers knew that. So the next stage involves Squirps having to take a little potty break, but uh-oh, the bathroom's occupied, and it's all out of toilet paper. Guess we gotta go find some. Cute concept, yeah, but I mean, come on, this is just filler. If this were structured more like the 1,000 Year Door, this could have been just a cute little gag that we could have quickly moved on from, but nope. We gotta make a whole goddamn level out of this now. The next stage is more shoot 'em up stuff, except now you're going through a maze. Alright, more filler. And the final stage is this wacky, gravity-shifting labyrinth that ends in one of the most memorable boss fights in the game. So yeah, the chapter starts with this really interesting concept and ends with an extremely memorable finale. But everything in between is just filler. Like I said, I get why the game had to be structured like this, but they really needed to spend more time refining some of these stages. Or better yet, why does each chapter need 4 stages? If cutting out all the filler means some chapters are shorter than others, well then so be it. I'll never understand why so many games value quantity over quality like this. Anyways though, it's been like 10 or 11 minutes and I haven't talked about anything other than the story yet. And that's because, well, the story is honestly a major focus this time, even more so than it was in previous Paper Marios. You see, while the Thousand Year Doors plot was fairly captivating, it usually rode shotgun as you made your way through it. The focus was on the adventure itself, not the reason for the adventure. Super Paper Mario, on the other hand, puts a lot more significance on why you're doing what you're doing. It constantly reminds you that, hey, if you screw this up, we're all gonna die. It gives the plot this weight to it that wasn't present in any of the previous games. It contrasts fairly heavily with the areas you'll be exploring as well. They ditched the unique tone that the Thousand Year Door had with its locations, and instead reverted back to the grassy plains and vast deserts that the Mario series is known for. At face value, this may seem like a downgrade, however, this change ends up complementing the overall experience in my opinion. I know I said I hate doing this, but slight spoiler here. In the first half of the game, it's your typical Mario romp. You'll travel through these fun, colorful worlds as you complete silly tasks for quirky NPCs. But throughout it all, there's this black void that's always present in the sky, and you'll soon start to notice that it's growing. Getting bigger and bigger, filling you with more and more anxiety until eventually. It's been quite a while since I last played Super Paper Mario, and honestly, I had forgotten a decent amount about it in that time. But this right here, this moment where you return to that world and find nothing, I will never forget. It's this game's turning point as you go from happy-go-lucky Mario to characters literally fearing for their lives as they're staring death in the face. This drastic change of tone hits you like a rock when it finally happens. Things used to be so happy, so carefree, but now it's gone. But with all that out of the way, let's finally talk about gameplay. Like I said before, instead of being a turn-based RPG, Super Paper Mario is a 2D platformer. However, it isn't just a 2D platformer. You also have the ability to switch to 3D at any time with the press of a button. You can only stay in 3D for a short amount of time, but being in 3D literally gives you a completely new perspective on an area. This allows the developers to hide secrets and puzzles that would normally be hidden in a flat 2-dimensional environment. For example, you might come across a dead end while in 2D, but if you switch to 3D, you might find a hidden path that wasn't visible to you before. This is such a cool mechanic. I mean, it's one of those things that just makes you go, how the hell didn't anyone think of this earlier? Now, while the mechanic is without a doubt an extremely cool concept, I don't feel like Intelligent Systems even came close to realizing its full potential. Most of the time it just boils down to hit a dead end and don't know what to do. Well, why not switch to 3D and oh, would you look at that? Another hidden pathway. And this basically applies to every puzzle throughout the game. They rarely deviate from this, like it's not even incorporated into the combat in any meaningful way. This means what once seemed like a fun and unique mechanic quickly turns into more of a novelty or a simple little party trick. Oh, God damn it, do we get it? You can switch from 2D to 3D. Get some new goddamn material. In order to make this feel more like a Paper Mario game and not just another 2D Mario platformer, Intelligent Systems tried to incorporate some RPG elements. Notice I said tried. For whatever reason, they decided to keep the leveling system from previous games, except instead of collecting 100 star points to level up, it's now based on how many points you have. Yeah, points finally have a purpose in a Mario game. This is such an unneeded system. I'm never paying attention to how many points I have, so leveling up always feels like it just happens randomly. Also, you can't choose which stat you level up like you could before. Sometimes it'll be your health, and other times it'll be your attack. Then there's the items. I always forget these are even here. Basically, using them grants you temporary perks, like raising your offense or defense. However, most enemies go down with just a bop or two to the head, so why even bother? These half-hearted attempts to include RPG elements make Super Paper Mario feel like it has a bit of an identity crisis. Like it doesn't know if it wants to be more of a platformer or more of an RPG. It just overcomplicates things, but thankfully you can ignore pretty much all of the stupid RPG stuff and just play this as a normal Mario platformer. But honestly, it's not even that great of a platformer either. If it's trying to replicate the feeling of old school Mario games, well then it completely failed. You see, a traditional 2D Mario game is usually focused around momentum. Mario builds up speed as you run, which directly impacts your jump arc. I mean, they literally included a meter for it in Mario 3. So yeah, momentum is pretty important in making a Mario game feel like, well, a Mario game. Super Paper Mario, however, has no sense of momentum whatsoever. There isn't even a run button, which makes the whole experience feel incredibly slow. If you couldn't already tell from the gameplay, Super Paper Mario is running off the same engine as the Thousand Year Door, and that right there should show you where these problems stem from. They tried to make a platformer in an engine made for an RPG. How do they think this is a good idea? Anyways though, I feel like my tone has completely changed. I mean, I started out by praising the story like it's the best thing ever. Then when the topic changed to gameplay, things took a bit of a turn. And well, that's basically Super Paper Mario in a nutshell. If you're someone who plays games mostly for story, well then you're gonna have an amazing time. But if you're more of a person who enjoys the, well, actual game part of a game, well, you're unfortunately gonna lose interest fairly quickly. Super Paper Mario's gameplay just lacks any sense of direction. It wants to be this unique blend of both a platformer and an RPG, but ends up executing both fairly poorly. These are two genres that are just not inherently compatible. I mean, platformers are usually focused on fast and kinetic gameplay, whereas RPGs are completely the opposite. They're slow and methodical, with a lot more focus on strategy and puzzle solving. Because of this, Super Paper Mario's mechanics are constantly conflicting with each other. It didn't have to be this way though. If they would have just picked one over the other, this wouldn't have been an issue. However, the platforming aspect would have needed a lot more work if they were to go that route. Like I said before, this is very obviously built in an engine meant for a slower paced RPG. Because of this, I think they should have leaned more into the RPG side of things. However, if you look through various interviews from the developers, it becomes pretty apparent that they had grown tired of creating RPGs after they finished the Thousand Year Door. To quote the game's chief director, he apparently wanted to make a game that could surprise people with brand new features within the Paper Mario concept. He then came up with the idea of switching between 2D and 3D, which he felt worked better in a more traditional Mario style. Fair enough, but why restrict yourself to an engine that's obviously not built with a traditional Mario style in mind? This game just doesn't feel like it was meant to be a platformer, but it was forced to because the developers wanted to try something new. Super Paper Mario really needed to be built from the ground up with an engine that didn't restrain it to the limitations of an RPG. But let's shift gears here and talk about something a bit more positive. Now, if there's one thing I love more than anything in a Paper Mario game, it's without a doubt the partners. So without further ado, let's bring them out. Here they are, the Super Paper Mario partner. What the fuck are you guys supposed to be? So yeah, the partner characters we've come to know and love from past games have been cut, and in their place we've got pixels. There's quite a few of them too. There's one that allows you to shrink, one that explodes, and even one that you can use as a hammer. While they've all got unique names, like fucking Boomer over here, in terms of personality, they kinda have one, I guess. Like, yeah, they each get a fun little introduction scene once you first meet them, but after that, they never talk again. This is such a disappointment, since some of them seem like they'd be pretty memorable characters if they were given just a bit more time to shine. But as it is, they might as well just be generic upgrades that you obtain. So yeah, pixels don't really fill the void left by traditional partners, but thankfully we also have multiple playable characters to make up for that. Peach, Bowser, and even Luigi are all playable in addition to Mario. They each come with their own special abilities. Peach can float through the air, Bowser is a goddamn tank and can breathe fire, and Luigi has a charge jump. They also bring their unique personalities to the table as well. Because of this, they're definitely a more suitable replacement for partners than Pixels were. However, I'm kinda split on them. On one hand, seeing as the cast is much smaller than it was in previous games, each character can get more screen time. You see, it's much more difficult to juggle 7 or 8 characters than it is to juggle 4. This also means they can be a lot more involved in the overarching story. However, on the other hand, these are all characters that we've seen a million times already. Now, I don't want to call them boring, but they're kind of boring, especially when you compare them to characters like Vivian, Bo, or Bobbery, who were all completely original. They're also just not that useful in a gameplay sense either. Like, they're extremely situational. You see, about 90% of the game is centered around the dimensional swapping mechanic, which only Mario can do. So for most of the game, there's literally no reason to play as anyone other than Mario. Super Paper Mario could have been this breath of fresh air for the series. Not saying things had to change, but the developers needed to change, and I respect them for doing so. But this game is just a mess of ideas and mechanics that ultimately don't mesh. There's some really interesting stuff here though, like take the game's main selling point, the ability to switch from 2D to 3D. On paper, this is such a cool idea, but it's never expanded upon past the initial novelty of it. Instead of trying to build on concepts like this, they chose to shoehorn in a bunch of other half-baked mechanics that had no reason being here. There's just too much fluff and not enough substance. Thankfully, the story more than makes up for this. However, not everyone plays games for story, so your mileage may vary. Revisiting this game after so many years though, I was surprised by how many issues I had with it. Like, I absolutely adored this game when I was younger, but now, not so much. I mean, it's alright, the story at least. So, what happened? Am I just a boring, jaded adult now? Were my standards just lower? Were the Paper Mario fans right about this game back then? Well, no. You see, while I was looking through those old forum posts of Paper Mario fans talking about how disappointed they were with this game, there was something that was pretty consistent among those who said they loved it. It was their first Paper Mario game. And yeah, that was the case for me too. We had no idea what had been lost with this entry. We were able to just enjoy it for what it was, a Mario game with an extremely compelling story. Yeah, it wasn't perfect, but it was unlike anything we had played before. However, now that I've experienced what came prior to it, I find its flaws to be much more apparent. So yeah, I finally see where people were coming from back then. This game is definitely a downgrade compared to the previous titles. But I don't want to give the impression that this game isn't worth playing. Honestly, I still feel like this is the perfect entry point into the series, especially if you aren't that familiar with turn-based RPGs. Side-scrollers are just inherently more easy to wrap your head around. The story and quirky characters are also at least on par with what came before it, so it'll give you a pretty good idea of what the tone of the series is. Even if you are a Paper Mario veteran, I'd still say this game is worth playing, as long as you know what you're getting yourself into. For a first attempt at trying to reinvent Paper Mario, this was pretty solid, all things considered. You could tell the developers had a lot of ideas that they wanted to experiment with that wouldn't have necessarily worked in the previous RPG style. Yeah, there's a lot of rough edges, but that can also be said for the original Paper Mario on N64. Then they were able to take those rough edges and refine them to near perfection with its follow-up. A sequel to Super Paper Mario where they expand upon all these new ideas could be just as great as the Thousand Year Door was. So, you know what? I think the future of Paper Mario is looking pretty bright. I mean, they can only go up from here, right? Right? Right?